Today's movie starts with Bob Harris, a washed-up middle-aged actor from the USA, arriving at Tokyo to do a whiskey commercial for $2 million. We learn that Bob is taking this job to take a little break from his marital problems with his wife Lydia, who he has been married to for 25 years. Together, they have an older son and a younger daughter. Bob is also having a midlife crisis and doesn't know what to do with himself as his career is dying back in the US. On our next scene, we see Bob arriving at a hotel where he's greeted warmly by the Japanese crew. They give him some presents and his room key, and they agree to meet up tomorrow for the shoot, and right before he leaves, he gets an envelope from the hotel staff. When he opens it, it was a fax message from his wife telling him that he's forgotten his son's birthday. Later that night, he was feeling a little jet-lagged and he goes down to the bar to get some drinks. There he meets other Americans who recognize him, and they tell him how great he was in his old movies, but Bob is really uncomfortable by this and he leaves shortly after. In the middle of the night, Bob gets another fax message sent from his wife. In the other side of the hotel, we are introduced to Charlotte. Charlotte is a young woman who's just graduated from Yale in philosophy, and she's accompanying her husband John, who works as a celebrity photographer in Tokyo. We see that Charlotte isn't also happy with her marriage, and she feels like her husband John doesn't appreciate her, and she even doubts if they still love each other. The next morning, while in the elevator, Bob sees Charlotte, and she smiles at him before leaving.
Wait, hold on. Did you subscribe to our channel? Come on guys, you're here, you're watching the video. Help us out by hitting the subscribe button, as it really helps out me and my team to make more videos for you guys. And now, let's get back to the recap.
Bob then goes to his first day of shooting, and he doesn't understand Japanese, so he has a translator who explains to him what the director is telling him. The director seems very angry and enthusiastic at the same time, and we hear him yelling for a solid few seconds, but the translator just tells Bob one single thing. Anyways, Bob manages to finish his first day of shooting, and we cut back to Charlotte, who's spending her day going to spiritual places. But at the end of her day, she still doesn't find what she's looking for and calls her friend crying. Meanwhile, Bob was watching some Japanese TV and gets a knock on his door, and he opens it and there's a woman standing there. She tells him Mr. Kazu sent her, and she then pushes him to his bed, revealing that she's a hooker. She then starts acting really weird. She doesn't really speak English, but she kept saying, "Lip my stocking, lip my stocking." And Bob thought she wanted to say, "Rip my stocking," and then she started to roleplay as a helpless girl, and this really freaks him out, and he pushes her away and escapes. The next morning, Bob goes back to his work, and he gets approached by the Japanese crew, and they ask him to extend his stay so he can go attend this talk show. Bob doesn't really want to attend this talk show, so he calls his agent and tells him to cancel this talk show thing, but his agent tells him that he's being paid good money, so he needs to attend the talk show. And after a lot of other misunderstandings with the crew, Bob finishes his second shot and he goes back to his hotel. Later that night, Bob was drinking at the bar while Charlotte was having dinner with her husband and their friends. Bob and Charlotte see each other from across the room and they smile at each other again. She then sends him a drink, which he appreciates and drinks in one single shot. Then we see Bob attempting to go for a run on a treadmill, but he accidentally turns up the speed and couldn't turn it back down because everything was in Japanese. And after some struggle, he manages to turn off the machine, but he hurts his leg in the process. The next day, as Charlotte was walking with John, they come across Kelly, an American actress who's promoting a movie she did with Keanu Reeves. John knows Kelly from before, and we see that Kelly is a little too friendly with him, and she's also kinda flirty. This makes Charlotte feel very insecure and a little jealous. Later that day, Charlotte was in her room listening to an audiobook which talks about purpose and how to find your destiny. At night, as both Bob and Charlotte were watching TV in their respective rooms, they both get bored after and they go down to the bar to grab a few drinks. There, they finally meet properly and exchange pleasantries. Bob lights her cigarettes and orders her the whiskey that he's doing the ad for. After they talk for a little while, the conversation turns to why they're both in Japan. They start to joke around and we see Charlotte laughing for the very first time in the movie. The next night, Bob is again drinking at the bar while Charlotte is getting bored listening to Kelly talk. Charlotte sees Bob at the bar and goes there to hang out with him. They joke a little again and make a plan to escape the country together. The next day, John leaves to another city for work, leaving Charlotte alone. She then invites Bob to join her and her friends for a party, and since Bob was also bored with his life, he agrees to come to the party. There, Charlotte introduces Bob to her friend Charlie. They have some drinks, they have fun, until Charlie does something and they're all kicked out of the party. They were all drunk and they get into a taxi cab and go to Charlie's home, and they have more drinks there and they dance and sing karaoke. After the party dies down, Bob finds Charlotte in the back room and she finally seems tired and rests on his shoulders. He then takes her back to her room and takes her shoes off and tucks her into bed. And Charlotte smiles at him before falling asleep. Bob goes back to his room and calls his wife. He tries to talk to her, but she was too busy making food for their daughter. Bob has finished shooting the commercial and is only now waiting for the interview. Because of this, he has a lot of free time on his hands, and later we see him meeting up with Charlotte to have some food. While having lunch, Charlotte shows Bob her injured toe, which she's been ignoring for a few days now. Bob tells her she needs to go to the hospital and then takes her to the hospital and drives her on a wheelchair in the lobby. When they get to the reception, the man can only speak Japanese, but they manage to find the doctor's room. And the doctor tells her that it's not really a serious issue and gives her some band-aids to cover her toe. Later that night, Bob gets a fax from Charlotte telling him to meet him in some club that Charlie told her about. But when Bob gets there, he finds this club is actually a strip club where women are naked dancing everywhere. Bob sits there awkwardly and he quietly waits for Charlotte. When Charlotte arrives shortly after, they both figure out that they don't want to be there, and so they leave the strip club immediately. As they run outside to get a taxi, they see Bob's whiskey ad printed on a big truck. They then go back to their hotel and sneak away from Kelly, who was singing in the bar. After a few hours, we see them both struggling to sleep. Then Charlotte gets a fax message from Bob inviting her to come hang out. She then goes to Bob's room where they watch TV and they talk about life while laying on the bed. Charlotte tells him about her fears and insecurities, and Bob comforts her and they both fall asleep next to each other. The next day, Charlotte travels the city sightseeing while Bob appears on the big Japanese talk show with a very enthusiastic host. Later that day, while Bob gets a call from Lydia, they talk a little about household stuff before Bob changes the conversation and tells her that he wants to get healthy and eat like the Japanese, and he also tells her that he no longer wants to eat her pasta. That night, Bob watches himself on TV and he gets bored and goes to a hotel bar where he gets into a conversation with a jazz singer that works in the bar. And even though they hit it off and they spent the night together, Bob still woke up regretting it. In the morning, Charlotte goes to Bob's room to ask him if he wants to have breakfast. He tells her later, but before she leaves, she hears a woman singing in the background, and she leaves feeling very upset. They later meet up for lunch, but the tension is still there, and they leave after making a few snide comments about each other. That same night, a fire alarm goes off in the building, which forces the residents to come to the ground. Bob and Charlotte run into each other. Bob then goes to her and they make up. Charlotte asks him when he's leaving, and he reveals that he'll be leaving tomorrow. They then go to the bar for a last drink and they talk about how they will miss one another. They also stare at each other intimately before Bob kisses her on the cheek and they both go to their rooms. In the morning, Bob leaves a message on the phone telling Charlotte goodbye, but right before he leaves the hotel, she catches up to him and they share a sincere but unsatisfactory goodbye. On his way to the airport, Bob sees Charlotte in a crowded street. He then stops the taxi and runs after her. When he catches up to her, he sees that she was crying. Charlotte is very happy to see him and they share a very deep and warm hug. As they hug, he whispers something in her ear and they gently kiss on the lips and say goodbye. They stare at each other as they both disappear from the view, both feeling somewhat happy. And the movie ends as Bob leaves to the airport traveling through Tokyo as a romantic music plays in the background and the screen goes black. And that is what I'll be leaving you guys with today. I love you guys so much. Make sure to leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to my channel, and I promise to you guys on my next recap, bye.